Chocolate hearts, bitter souls. Valentine's Day always made Sarah uneasy. It wasn't the hearts or roses. It was the weight of the holiday, the unspoken expectation to find joy in it. This year was no different. She walked through the town's winding streets under a dull, gray drizzle, her umbrella barely shielding her from the biting cold. As she passed the rows of glowing storefronts, couples laughed and strolled arm in arm, their happiness making the night feel lonelier than usual. She turned down a quieter street, seeking escape from the crowds. That's when she saw it. A shop she had never noticed before, nestled between a shuttered bookstore and a decaying pawnshop. Its sign, illuminated by a flickering red light, read, "Valentine's Delights." The letters glimmered faintly, as if wet with fresh paint. The window display was modest, intricately shaped chocolates laid out in patterns that resembled vines curling around hearts. In the center sat a glass case housing a massive chocolate heart, its surface gleaming unnaturally, as though it pulsed with a faint inner light. Sarah hesitated. She had lived in the town for years and knew every street, every shop. This one hadn't been there yesterday. The rain intensified, and a gust of wind tugged at her umbrella, nearly pulling it from her hands. Without thinking, she stepped through the door. A delicate chime announced her arrival. The shop was dimly lit, with shelves upon shelves of chocolates, each one more elaborate than the last. The air was thick with a sweet, cloying aroma that made Sarah's stomach flutter. She felt both comforted and slightly sickened by the intensity of the smell. "Welcome, dear." The voice came from behind the counter, a woman shrouded in shadow. As Sarah's eyes adjusted, she saw her more clearly. Madame Alara, as the small nameplate pinned to her crimson blouse read, was tall and unnervingly elegant. Her skin was pale, her hair dark and impossibly sleek, framing a face so symmetrical it bordered on uncanny. But it was her eyes that unsettled Sarah most, dark, glittering pools that seemed to see right through her. "You look like someone who could use something special tonight," Madame Alara said, her voice smooth, like velvet sliding over steel. Without waiting for a response, she reached beneath the counter and produced a small, heart-shaped chocolate wrapped in gold foil. "A gift, for you." Sarah hesitated. "I don't have any money." Alara smiled faintly, as if the notion was laughable. "No charge. A token of kindness for someone spending Valentine's alone." The words, though harmless, struck a chord in Sarah, her loneliness stinging like a fresh wound. She took the chocolate, feeling its coolness through the foil. It was heavier than it looked, and when she unwrapped it, the glossy surface reflected the dim light like polished glass. The scent was intoxicating. "Go on," Alara urged. "Take a bite." Sarah's instinct told her to decline, to leave and never look back. But there was a pull, a magnetism to the chocolate, and to Alara that she couldn't resist. She bit into it. The taste was indescribable, richer and sweeter than anything she'd ever had. It melted on her tongue, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt, colors sharpening and sounds becoming clearer. When she looked at Alara again, the woman's smile had widened imperceptibly. "Delicious, isn't it?" Alara murmured. "Come back soon, dear." Sarah nodded numbly, the shop's air pressing against her like a weighted blanket. She stumbled out into the rain, the chocolate's flavor lingering on her lips. The next morning, Sarah awoke with an unusual energy. The lingering lethargy that usually weighed her down was gone, replaced by a lightness she couldn't explain. She stared at herself in the bathroom mirror, blinking at her reflection. Her skin looked brighter, almost luminous, and the shadows under her eyes had faded overnight. She should have been thrilled, but a whisper of unease threaded through her thoughts. The memory of the shop, of Madame Alara's piercing gaze tugged at the edges of her mind. Yet the memory of that chocolate, a taste unlike any other, comforted her in an odd way, lulling her doubts. At work, the day unfolded like a dream. Her co-worker Megan, usually vibrant and full of laughter, seemed oddly subdued, her usual chatter replaced by silence. By lunchtime, Megan had slumped over her desk, her face pale and drawn. Concerned, Sarah offered her a sip of water. When Megan looked up, her eyes were dull, her movements sluggish. "You okay?" Sarah asked. Megan nodded weakly. "Just tired. Probably coming down with something." Sarah's stomach churned. A flicker of a memory surfaced. Megan had taken a bite of a chocolate heart Sarah had offered her that morning. The same heart from Madame Alara. The thought sent a chill through Sarah. She shook her head, telling herself it was coincidence, but a growing dread whispered otherwise. That night, Sarah walked past the bathroom mirror again. She froze, her reflection catching her eye. She leaned in closer, running her fingers along her cheekbones. Her face was sharper, her skin almost unnaturally smooth. The realization hit her like a punch. She looked younger. The feeling of triumph was quickly overshadowed by the memory of Megan, her vitality seemingly drained. Sarah's breath caught. The chocolate. She dressed quickly and headed out into the night, her footsteps quickening as she approached the edge of town. The rain had stopped, and the air was eerily still. The shop's sign flickered faintly ahead, its crimson glow like a beacon. When Sarah stepped inside, the chocolates gleamed under the dim light. Madame Alara stood behind the counter, her lips curving into that familiar, unsettling smile. "I was wondering when you'd return," Alara said softly, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I see the chocolates agree with you." Sarah's voice trembled. "What are they?" Alara's smile widened. "Why, dear, they're life itself." Sarah's mouth went dry at Madame Alara's words. "Life itself," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The shop seemed darker now, its warmth replaced by a creeping chill that crawled along her spine. Alara tilted her head, studying Sarah as though she were a curious insect caught in a web. "You've felt it, haven't you? The vitality, the lightness, a little gift from me to you." "It's not natural," Sarah said, her voice faltering. "Megan, my co-worker, she's sick, and I—" Her words caught in her throat as her reflection in the glass display caught her eye. The glow of her skin, the sharpness of her features, it was undeniable. She looked better, healthier. But at what cost? Alara chuckled softly, a sound that resonated like the low chime of a funeral bell. "Ah, yes, Megan. She tasted a piece, didn't she? A small price for such exquisite pleasure." Sarah took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. "What are you talking about? What's in those chocolates?" Alara's smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a shade too perfect, too sharp. "Essence, my dear. The essence of the eater is drawn out and redistributed, if you will. A bit for you, a bit for me. Everyone wins." "Wins?" Sarah's voice rose, cracking with disbelief. "You're stealing people's lives." "Borrowing," Alara corrected, her tone calm, almost soothing. "A sip here, a sip there. They won't even notice, not unless they're particularly fragile. And you, my dear, are thriving." "No," Sarah's voice trembled with a mix of fear and defiance. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't agree to whatever this is." Alara's expression darkened, the pleasant mask slipping to reveal something far more sinister. Her eyes glinted like shards of obsidian, and the air around her seemed to shimmer faintly, as though reality itself recoiled from her presence. "You did agree, Sarah," she said, her voice low and cold. "The moment you stepped into my shop, the moment you tasted my chocolate, you accepted the gift." Sarah's breath hitched, and she turned on her heel, bolting for the door. She flung it open and stumbled into the night, her heart pounding like a drumbeat. The rain had started again, soaking her clothes as she sprinted home. But even as she fled, the memory of the chocolate's taste lingered, sweet and seductive. It filled her mind like a siren song, pulling at her resolve. The next morning, Sarah woke with a splitting headache. The events of the previous night played over in her mind like a fever dream. She rushed to her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. Her features were even sharper now, her skin unnaturally smooth, her eyes bright with a predatory gleam. She shuddered, the memory of Megan's wan face flashing in her mind. Sarah reached for her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed Megan's number. The line rang and rang before going to voicemail. Fear clawed at her chest. She had to find out if Megan was okay. When Sarah arrived at Megan's apartment, the door was ajar, and the lights inside flickered weakly. "Megan!" she called, stepping inside. The living room was eerily quiet, the air heavy with a faintly sweet scent that made Sarah's stomach churn. She found Megan slumped on the couch, her skin waxy and pale, her breath shallow. On the coffee table lay an open box of chocolates, their glossy surfaces catching the dim light. Sarah knelt beside her friend, shaking her gently. "Megan, wake up!" Megan's eyes fluttered open, dull and unfocused. She tried to speak, but her voice was barely a rasp. "I feel so tired." A wave of guilt and panic crashed over Sarah. She knew, deep down, that Megan's condition was tied to the cursed chocolates. She had brought this upon her. Sarah spent the rest of the day researching, desperate for answers. Her internet searches yielded nothing useful, just folklore and myths about witches and cursed food. But one name kept resurfacing in the darkest corners of the web: Madame Ilara. Threads on obscure forums whispered about an ageless chocolatier who appeared in towns on holidays, her confections leaving trails of mysterious illnesses and disappearances. Some called her a witch, others a demon. But all the accounts ended the same way, with Ilara vanishing, her shop dissolving into thin air. Sarah's pulse quickened as she pieced the fragments together. She couldn't let this happen again. She had to stop Ilara. That night she returned to the shop. It loomed in the darkness like a predator lying in wait, its crimson sign pulsing faintly. As she stepped inside, the air grew heavy, the sweet aroma thick and suffocating. Ilara stood behind the counter, her dark eyes glittering with amusement. "Back so soon, Sarah? You must have quite the sweet tooth." Sarah ignored the taunt, her jaw tight with anger. "This has to end. You're killing people." Ilara sighed, feigning disappointment. "Oh, Sarah, must we go through this? Every gift has a cost. You've enjoyed the benefits, haven't you? Why deny others the same pleasure?" "I didn't know what I was agreeing to," Sarah shot back. "But now I do, and I won't let you hurt anyone else." Ilara's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "You're making a mistake, my dear. These people you're so concerned about, they live their dull, dreary lives, taking for granted the vitality I've gifted you. Would you rather be like them?" Sarah stepped closer to the counter, her fists clenched. "I'd rather be myself than whatever you've turned me into." Ilara's laughter was low and sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You think you can stop me, Sarah? You're just a girl, and I am eternal." But Sarah wasn't backing down. Her resolve burned brighter than her fear. She reached for a heavy jar of cocoa powder on the counter and hurled it at Ilara, shattering it against the wall. Ilara hissed, her face twisting with rage. The lights in the shop flickered violently, casting distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and reach for Sarah. "You'll regret this," Ilara growled, her voice resonating with a bone-chilling echo. Sarah didn't wait to see what would happen next. She grabbed a tray of chocolates and dashed out the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The shop's crimson glow faded behind her, but the darkness that followed was far from over. The chocolates Sarah had grabbed felt unnaturally heavy in her arms as she stumbled through the rain-soaked streets. The tray seemed to radiate a faint warmth, as if the confections inside were alive, pulsing with stolen vitality. Each step felt slower than the last, the air around her thickening like syrup, pressing against her chest. The night seemed endless, the streetlights flickering weakly, casting distorted shadows that danced and writhed as if mocking her. By the time Sarah reached the edge of town, she could feel a cold, malevolent presence closing in. Madame Elara wasn't far behind. She burst through the doors of the small church at the end of the street, her breath ragged. The ancient building was dimly lit, its candles casting long shadows across the worn pews. She dropped the tray onto the altar, her hands trembling as she stared at the cursed chocolates. Their glossy surfaces glimmered faintly, almost as if they were breathing. Sarah clutched the edge of the altar, her mind racing. She knew Elara would come for her, but the thought of letting these cursed creations spread further filled her with dread. She remembered the online threads, whispers of rituals, of breaking curses tied to objects of power. If Elara had truly bound her dark essence to these chocolates, perhaps destroying them could sever her hold. The sound of the church doors creaking open snapped Sarah's head up. A wave of icy air swept into the room, extinguishing all but the altar's candles. There, framed by the flickering light, stood Madame Elara. Her elegant demeanor was gone, replaced by a primal, otherworldly fury. Her eyes burned with a dark fire, and the shadows around her writhed like living things. "Do you think you can escape me, Sarah?" Elara's voice was layered, resonating with an unnatural timbre that set Sarah's teeth on edge. "You've tasted my gift. You are mine now." Sarah took a step back, gripping a candlestick from the altar. Her voice was shaky but defiant. "Your gift is a curse, and I won't let you hurt anyone else." Elara laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the church like a dirge. "You are naive, child. Do you think destroying those chocolates will stop me? My essence lives in you now. It is woven into your very being." The words struck Sarah like a physical blow, but she refused to falter. "Maybe," she said, her grip tightening on the candlestick. "But if these chocolates are your power, I'll take that away." With a single desperate motion, Sarah brought the candlestick down onto the tray of chocolates. The impact sent shards of chocolate scattering across the altar. A hissing sound filled the air, and the chocolates oozed a dark, viscous liquid that sizzled as it hit the stone. Elara shrieked, her voice splitting into a cacophony of wails. The room seemed to ripple, the walls bending inward as if the building itself was recoiling from her. Her form flickered, shifting between human and something monstrous, her limbs elongating, her face stretching into an unnatural snarl. "You will regret this," Elara howled, her voice filled with a venom that curdled the air. She lunged towards Sarah, but the young woman held her ground. The scattered remains of the chocolates began to bubble and burn, releasing a pungent, acrid smoke that filled the room. Elara faltered, her movements jerky and disjointed. The shadows around her writhed in agony, their forms breaking apart like smoke caught in a gale. Sarah seized the moment. She grabbed the largest remaining piece of chocolate, the heart that had gleamed so brilliantly, and hurled it into the church's fire pit. The flames roared to life, consuming the cursed confection. A deafening scream tore through the air, and Elara's body contorted violently, her form unraveling like a frayed thread. The fire flared brightly one last time, and then, as quickly as it had started, the chaos ended. The church fell silent, the oppressive weight in the air lifting. Sarah collapsed to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion. The church candles flickered weakly, casting their soft glow across the now empty room. Of Alara, there was no trace. Only the faint scent of burnt sugar and ash lingered in the air. But as Sarah sat there, catching her breath, a new unease settled over her. She glanced at her reflection in the polished silver of the candlestick. Her face was still too sharp, too radiant, her eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. Alara was gone, but the curse wasn't. She rose slowly, her steps unsteady as she left the church and stepped into the pre-dawn light. The rain had stopped, and the town was eerily quiet, as if the world itself held its breath. In the reflection of a nearby window, her own image stared back at her, smiling faintly, unnervingly. The taste of the chocolate lingered on her tongue, sweet and bitter all at once. Somewhere deep inside, Sarah knew that this was far from over.